Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Don't forget, we got Mindspeak coming up, not this Sunday, but the following Sunday, with Professor Howard French. And he's really an expert and a deep diver into the whole China-Africa relationship. And I'm sure that's going to be extremely interesting for all of us. Let's move on to Africa. In a statement, the head of the Transitional Military Council, Burhan, who's not meant to be the real power, the power behind the throne is this chap called Hemeti. Burhan has lost its peacefulness, so we halted negotiations for 72 hours, he said. The revolution in Sudan has lost its peacefulness. Seriously, last I checked, none of these were violent. Roadblocks, debris on railroad tracks, media escalation and antagonization. They think if they can just brand the protest as violent, they can get sympathy. No. As I've said before, this is all about what Virilio was saying. The revolutionary contingent attains its ideal form, not in the place of production, which is where the army wants to send them all back to, but in the street, where for a moment it stops being a cog in the technical machine and itself becomes a motor, machine of attack. In other words, a producer of speed. And of course, as Kapuscinski said, if the crowd disperses, goes home, does not reassemble, we can say the revolution is over, and that's what they're trying to make happen. 1st of April, I was talking about the world's end. I'd gotten a bit apocalyptic, and I was saying the crisis, quoting Antonio Gramsci, the crisis consists precisely in the fact that the old is dying and the new cannot be born. This Transitional Military Council is so antiquated. I mean, they even thought of bringing Sharia law. That means they hadn't even gone and met these people who are outside their window. Same article I was saying, in Africa in particular, a lot of leadership is in the departure lounge. But Bouteflika at that time was surely the most extreme example. Now I see Salva Kiir's getting worried. In the past 2 weeks, a new group calling itself the Red Card Movement has been circulating calls online for a protest on Thursday with the hashtags Kiir must go and South Sudan uprising, with organizers appearing to be based mostly in the diaspora. It's not easy to protest, a bit trigger happy. Feud between Paul Kagame and Museveni takes its toll, reports the Mail and Guardian. People living on either side of the Ugandan-Rwandan border at Katuna never much considered the boundary. Children crossed for school, workers moved freely, and trade thrived. That harmony evaporated in February when Rwanda abruptly closed the crossing, with queues of cargo trucks and thronging merchants turned back as soldiers from both armies marshaled along the forest-clad border. Those who think we have not seen enough of a mess and want to mess with us, whether from here or from outside, I want to say we will mess up with them big time, Kagame. Food prices have jumped in Rwanda, which relies heavily on imports from its larger northern neighbor. The blockade has also severed Uganda's land access to export markets in the DR Congo and Burundi. This is a contest to determine who between them is the kingmaker in the region. This is a political analyst in Kigali. They say when two elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. We are suffering, said Mugasha. President Kagame was my guest at Mindspeak in 2011. Have a listen. One of my favorite quotes, and there are plenty of them of his, is, I think being African is not a question of the color of the skin, it's the mindset. President Museveni was also my guest at Mindspeak, and have a look at that one. Turned up 4 hours late. We had to keep the audience happy all that time. Zimbabwe's inflation rate continues to soar. It rose to 76% year on year in April from 67% in March. Paul Wallace. And this is a point I've made before, that there is a correlation between high inflation and revolutionary conditions. Sudan is a recent example. Then I remember this quote from The Guardian: the government can switch off the internet, but not the frustrations of millions of people. That was about Zimbabwe when they were switching it on and off. Social media services have been blocked in Eritrea, with people now sending messages via VPN. According to the Internet World Stats, Eritrea is one of the lowest internet penetrations in the world. In 2018, it had only 71,000 internet users. They made up just 1.3% of the population. Communication in Eritrea is strictly controlled by the government. There is no private media, and the internet cannot be accessed via mobile phones. He's another fellow in the departure lounge. The Russian government, RT, and the Eritrean national broadcaster are partnering. A move the Eritrean Ministry of Information says is in line with its work to expand the source of information. That's good. In an interview in January, I said to Sami Mizaidan in Al Jazeera, what we're watching across this continent is a kind of tipping point moment. Moody's says Angola's economy is going to return to growth in 2019, emerge from recession this year, growing at 0.3% after 3 years of contraction. Debt to GDP will fall to around 70%. Debt burden remains vulnerable to further exchange rate depreciation. There's a huge gap between the official and the unofficial rate, but I'd agree with them. I'm bullish about Angola. I think you're getting in at the lows, and they've made some good moves. Has Liberia's George Weah scored an own goal? Liberian economy has taken a serious nosedive under the leadership of former soccer icon President George Weah. Local currency has seen a drastic depreciation. You currently need 176 Liberian dollars to buy a single United States dollar. Price of basic commodities such as rice, cooking oil and sugar have more than doubled. The Atlantic, Tanzania was East Africa's strongest democracy. Then came the bulldozer, talking about how when he first arrived, he went round interrogating staff, let it be known that a government long characterized by laxity was in for a major change. Later cancelled Independence Day celebrations, redirected the funding to fight cholera, gave scoldings on live TV. Africa took notice. Twitter users across the continent adopted the hashtag #WhatWouldMagufuli do to speculate how he might clean up their own governments. 10 months into his first term, polling by Twaweza found that 96% of Tanzanians approved of his performance. Subsequently, they came out with another poll, which he didn't want to hear about. There's been a big shift to a much more constricted, constrained environment. Aiden Eyakuze, who I know, people are scared to say what they used to be able to say. Magufuli's muscular nationalism, as Eyakuze calls it, includes an intensifying war on information. In February, authorities suspended The Citizen for a week after it reported a decline in the value of the Tanzanian shilling and a slight discrepancy between rates on the street and at commercial banks. Restrictions on the export of grain and a bizarre plan to cut out middlemen from the cashew industry, they've all gone bad, I'm sure, have rankled farmers. Business people say the crackdown on corruption has had the unintended consequence of making it harder to do deals, and rising policy uncertainty has compelled banks to withhold lending. Acts of resource nationalism, such as levying of an extraordinary $190 billion tax bill on London-based acacia mining, initially met with praise at home and making foreign investors wary. Last month, the government blocked publication of an IMF report that warned of unpredictable and interventionist policies. Richard Fabian, who sells kingfish, barracuda and red snapper along the bustling Dar es Salaam waterfront, says the economic situation now is the worst he's experienced in his 15 years on the job. We are going backwards, the 70-year-old says from his Dar es Salaam office. Only one person is giving orders. When he orders, you comply. As I said at the end of last year in Tanzania, investors are having to price in a Magufuli haircut. Have a listen to this clip of the president of the African Development Bank praising Magufuli, and he's got a lot of pushback on that because he's talking about growth of 7%, and clearly most predictions are that it's going to halve. But you know, I'd have seen as a man who's not going to go and criticize anyone in public who works behind the scenes. South African all share up 6.27% this year. Dollar rand, as I said, strengthening, 14.20. Egyptian pound, 17.05, best performing currency in the world last year, and probably this. EGX 30 up 5.94%. That's come off the boil, as most of the African stock markets have. A $5 billion listing is set to make MTN Nigeria its number 2 firm. That's Paul Wallace. Nigerian stocks are down 9.8% this year, one of the worst performances globally. But have a look at the chart, you'll see who's doing well and who isn't. Sri Lanka is the laggard. Nigerian all share minus 10%. Ghana Stock Exchange minus 4.39% year to date. Deutsche Bank opens a €1 billion line of credit to finance the country's trade. Angola, Abidjan, Gregory Smith. Ivory Coast is one of the most dynamic economies right now, 7% plus growth since 2012. Maintaining 7% means an economy doubles in size every 10 years. The African Development Bank estimates that 62% of Africa's exports are primary products. As a result, Africa earns just 5.5% of the $100 billion cocoa trade, despite accounting for 75% of the world's cocoa supplies. That's symptomatic of the disease. A similar story applies to tobacco, coffee, cotton, and others, leading to a clear consensus for Africa to earn more and develop through trade. It must process its raw materials to higher value semi-finished or finished products. Uganda's tourism sector has continued to generate more revenue than all other sectors, posting $1.63 billion in 2018, up from $1.4 billion in 2017.